I'm going to talk about a couple books by the political scientist John Hibbing. The first was called Stealth Democracy, which I believe he co-wrote. Forgive me, I don't remember the name of his co-author. This book was put up free to read online, which is a custom that I highly approve of for scholars and could wish that would become the standard in many cases. The second is called the Securitarian personality. These are both works of scholarship. They have graphs, they have lots of endnotes. They're based on original research that Hibbing and his teams conducted. The first came out in about 2002, and it was based on research into the United States political and civic attitudes. And the second was in 2020 and was based on a narrow, lengthy study on the really die-hard supporters of Donald Trump. And between the two of them, they make a compelling portrait for what would be the right way to put it? For the difficulties that the U.S. faces right now politically. I'll start with the Securitarian personality. Hibbing makes a good long effort to identify and delve into the attitudes of people who specifically supported Donald Trump before his election and kept supporting him all the way into late 2019. So these are long-term supporters whose support did not waver. And the commonality that Hibbing finds that they all share is they're what he terms securitarians. Although they're often accused of being authoritarians, he argues that this is not quite the correct attitude, that they do not seek authority and that is not what they are looking for from Donald Trump. What they're looking for and what they seek is security. Specifically, security from outsiders and insiders within their society. This is such a primary cause of concern for these people, who Hibbing tentatively identifies as about 10 to 20% of the population, that they will sacrifice a great deal, almost everything else, if they feel that advances, that sacrifice will advance a securitarian cause. They will sacrifice prosperity, they will sacrifice justice, they will sacrifice human rights, they will sacrifice the good opinion of the world, they will sacrifice civility for the sake of advancing group and individual security. And Hibbing makes a powerful case that, seen through this light, the attitudes of the really hardcore Trump supporters do make sense. They are not as internally contradictory as they seem to people who are not securitarians. That if you simply focus on the question of, will this increase the perceived security of the person or the group they're most concerned with, that you will be able to follow and sort of follow their policy lines and watch them develop. He makes it clear that Trump is a really natural leader for this idea. Trump, of course, himself is quite a securitarian. One of his early moments in politics was in the 1980s, after the attack on the person who became known as the Central Park Jogger. Trump took out a full-page ad in, I think it was the Times, New York Times. It might have been the Post. Forget, I don't remember the details. But he spent a lot of his own money to charge the city with failing to keep its people safe. And he, I think, suggested some sort of horrible punishment for the people who had done this crime. So Trump is by nature one of these securitarians, and for that reason, securitarians really love him, because he reduces the complex trade-offs between, you know, rights and freedom and safety. He goes all in on safety. He doesn't really care too much about anything else. And because of that, because he's had so many years of a full securitarian pulpit, let me say that again. Because a full-on securitarian had so many years with the authority of the presidency to sort of control the national conversation, it seems likely that that increased the total number of securitarians out there, securitarian-leaning people out there, and that someone else who, or Trump himself, of course, could again sort of harness that support for political purposes. This is a good work of scholarship, and in a good work of scholarship, you know, it's often all about the setup and then the explication. So Hibbing takes a good chunk of the beginning of the book explaining what he was trying to do, what question he was trying to answer, and how he went about doing that. And for works of social science, I highly recommend that you look for works that do this thoroughly and that bound their investigations well. So Hibbing's work on sort of identifying the people who he wanted to reach, and then taking the time to fully investigate their attitudes and the commonalities across different policies which inform those attitudes, it really makes for a compelling piece of work where you come away feeling like you have learned something useful that'll help you navigate the world. So as a piece of scholarship for non-scholars, non-peers, for lay people, it's a very successful book. The message is disheartening and, of course, deeply concerning, but it's pleasant to read a good piece of scholarship that does not try to answer or every single thing, but just to sort of like home in on a particularly interesting little facet of what's going on in the country and, you know, shed a little bit of light on it. One thing that the book made me think is that a surprisingly large number of people think that the truth is easy or obvious or without difficulty in implementing, or is complete to forms a complete picture of the world, that like you can just sort of know what's true, and that this is not hard, and that other people who make it hard are doing it for nefarious or self-interested reasons. And it is strange and odd for me to try to engage with people or works of culture that are built around that assumption that truth is simple, that, you know, it's uncontroversial, and that it's easy to acquire and to put into practice. Because scholarship like Hibbing, you know, who took an entire book and years of work to, you know, sort of delve into one small piece of a complex world, should show that the truth is very difficult to acquire, that it's even more difficult to implement actions based upon that truth, that it's always fragmentary and limited by the time and the attention that we can give to finding it, and that you should not especially assume that anything that says they're going to give you the truth for free, it could possibly deliver on that promise. This idea that difficult questions are quite easy and that everybody agrees on what should be done, and that disagreement only rises because the people involved in the disagreement are out for something for themselves or are being disingenuous. This is part of what is in Hibbing's other book, Stealth Democracy, which in its way, although it's 20 years old, is even more disheartening for the future of U.S. Democracy than the Securitarian personality. Stealth Democracy is a larger, deeper, more dive. It encompasses more than the Securitarian personality, which was mostly looking at a relatively small number of people over a small period of time. But Stealth Democracy looked at it as a broader sweep and aims to very neutrally and dispassionately ask what it is that citizens of the U.S. want from their government. What is it that they want? What do they think they get? What is it they believe to be possible? And this is clearly the result of years of work. There's multiple studies that investigate opinions and public attitudes across a wide range of issues and that look for commonalities. There's the use of secondary literature and other studies in the field, and the whole result is really very good. It's not a easy read, but it's not impossible, and it's not too long. There aren't too many graphs and endnotes, and generally the authors have a happy habit of summarizing regularly what it is that the latest bit of evidence is telling them. And what they find is that a very large number of U.S. citizens, possibly as much as half, want the government to be what they call ENSIDs, E-N-S-I-D. It's a little bit of sort of scholarly shorthand, and it stands for empathetic, non-self-interested decision makers. So people want the government to empathize with their problems and to show compassion and sympathy for the citizens. They very much want the government to be not self-interested, to not have a angle that it's pursuing. They want the government to be, very neutral and to not have any appearance of personal gain involved in its decisions. And then they wanted to make decisions. They wanted to be the decision maker. They do not want to make decisions on their own. They want the government to make those decisions, but they want those decisions to be right, and they pretty much want them to be right all the time. It is I say this is disheartening. This is really disheartening. It's not that these are bad things for the government to be, but they can't be the only things. An empathetic government is important, but a just government is more important. A non-self-interested government is important, but a government that has the support of its citizens for its policies is more important. A government that makes decisions is important, but that those decisions be guided by an engaged citizenry and a range of civic institutions is more important. Because what you wind up coming away with from this book is the feeling that Americans want a perfect parent. They want someone who is always there for them, who isn't taking care of them for any selfish reason, and who will make all the hard choices and will get them all right. And this is obviously a non-starter. This is not achievable. This is not how a fair and neither fair nor safe nor prosperous, let's put it that way. You can't have a fair, safe, and prosperous society built around a government that's expected to take care of these things for people. It is not. It can't be done. It can't be done. What you get out of it is just this growing distance between the government and the citizens as the problems of the one become increasingly opaque to the other, and as each reach for more power directly within their own sphere to defend themselves from the other. It does not look good. And Hibbing and his co-authors are honest enough to say, yeah, this does not look good. This is not. Long-term prospects are poor. It seems like in the last 20 years since Stealth Democracy came out, we have only gone further along this arc of relying on a few well-paid, narrowly informed experts in given fields to make decisions that the rest of us do not feel qualified to make, or perhaps don't even want to be qualified to make, because then we would have to accept shared responsibility. People would like to maintain the sort of the veto and the voice of disapproval over the choices of these experts, but they don't want to share the responsibility for making those decisions. One example, just from another field that struck me strongly, there is a book that called Get What's Yours. It is a guide to Social Security for citizens, written by a couple of professors who are experts in Social Security. And in one edition of the book, they pointed out a loophole which allowed people to sort of claim more, quote-unquote, Social Security than they might really merit, quote-unquote. In the Social Security Administration actually sort of thanked them for publicizing this, because they were able to get this loophole fixed in a bill that reformed some of Social Security's policies around 2014. And this bill was so big, and Social Security is such a hot potato in the U.S. that when it was about to be passed, Social Security sent a draft copy of this bill to these two guys and asked them to double check it real quick and see if they saw any problems. And these guys were, I mean, they did it, and they said they were, happy to help out, but they were just a little aghast at the largest federal spending program, and the details of its reform are being entrusted to two professors who, are experts and should perhaps be involved in that decision. But they're like, this really merits the wider discussion of the whole country, and it is foolish to do this, but it also seems to be the way that the people who want the government to be NSIDS want it to be done. Because if you have no responsibility, you don't have to change. You can simply provide critique. And there are many reasons why we might have wound up in this particular mess, and we won't go into all of those right now. They vary broadly in the weight and the explication that you can give them. But let's just sit for a moment with where we are right now and not argue about how we got here, which is a country where half of the adults in the country have a, I want to say, almost angelic view of the ideal operations of their government, where, right decisions and decency are simply delivered from above by an all-caring provider. And because of this, we lose both the input of these people and what they really want, and they lose the chance to become more informed citizens who are capable of approving of better policies, and we lose the chance for those better policies to be comprehensible. And I cannot help but feel that even when you come to a good policy, it's a good idea for most of the people affected by the policy to know why it's good, so that they might draw lessons from how it goes in the years to come. If it should prove to be not as good as we thought, you have to know why it was put into place in order to know why it didn't go as well as it should. Or if it should prove to be a happy surprise, you have to know why it was put into place to see why it did so well, so that we could possibly replicate its success in another area. And it is a distressing turn to the long-term democratic dream, the one that we've sort of been pursuing
The finger paint.
for several hundred years, to see that at a certain point it seems that democracy to a lot of people is the right to not give a
Hello.
hoot.
Hey. Welcome, welcome. Hi,